It's Reconciliation Week, and I would venture that it holds particular significance this year when our nation is engaged in a conversation around the proposed Indigenous voice to Parliament. Celebrated since 2001, the aim of Reconciliation Week is to strengthen relationships between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and non-Indigenous peoples as we continue to develop a strong nation enriched by respect for each other. But true reconciliation calls for an engagement of hearts, attitudes, minds and actions as we dialogue and develop an ever-increasing level of understanding between us. Reconciliation Week also provides an opportunity to learn more about our shared cultures and achievements. But another important aspect of learning and reconciliation is truth-telling about our shared history. And there's no doubt that the original armed entry into the lives of Indigenous people, the subsequent act of taking possession without consent, the cruelty and violence, the forced removal of children from their parents, all of this imposed a profound injustice on the original inhabitants of this land. Lieutenant James Cook and later Governor Arthur Phillip were instructed that consent from occupants of any southern land was paramount prior to taking possession, and that they were to live in amity and kindness. They were also told that if any person should wantonly destroy them or interrupt their occupations, such offenders must be brought to punishment. However, under the prevailing social Darwinist theories of the day, Indigenous people were considered inferior, and what ensued were acts of injustice at an unimaginable level. The majority of churches and missionaries attempted to protect and support Indigenous people, but it must be said that some also participated in their dispossession and the loss of their cultures and languages. These events were the root cause of untold loss of property and life with consequences to this day. Acknowledging these truths, identifying the evil perpetrated against Aboriginal people by our forebears is a vitally important aspect of reconciliation. And whilst I'm not personally responsible for the past wrongs, I am nonetheless filled with sorrow at what happened. Today's Australians were not themselves involved in what occurred, but compassion and sorrow should never be limited only to those we have personally wronged. And we're not talking about ancient history. Many alive today experienced the trauma firsthand or have parents or grandparents who were affected. When most Australian women celebrated the right to vote in 1902, Aboriginal women were excluded. In 1944, Western Australia introduced citizenship for Aboriginal people if they met certain conditions, including not suffering from certain medical conditions, being able to understand and speak English, and having industrious habits. Aboriginal people seeking citizenship often had to demonstrate that they no longer associated with their communities. So it's not surprising that many refused to suffer the indignity of applying for citizenship. In 1957, the Northern Territory Welfare Ordinance declared almost all Aboriginal people to be wards of the state. World-renowned artist Albert Namatjira was one of the very few to be instead granted citizenship. And it wasn't until 1965 that all Australian states allowed Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to vote. Finally, on the 27th of May 1967, when I was in primary school, the Constitution was changed. The census now included every Australian. We were finally one people, and this was a unifying time for all Australians. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people were acknowledged in their rightful place, equals. Then in May 1998, Australia held a National Sorry Day, which became an annual event with Australians encouraged to commemorate the past mistreatment of Indigenous brothers and sisters and to acknowledge the trauma and loss created through government policies. Something important happened regarding this day, though, in 2005, and something that I believe should have been very significant. The National Sorry Day Committee renamed Sorry Day. It was henceforth to be known as a National Day of Healing. The motion for this change was tabled in Parliament by then Democrat Senator Aidan Ridgway, who, at the time, was the only Aboriginal Member of Parliament. He said, "The day will focus on the healing needed throughout Australian society if we are to achieve reconciliation." Now, I don't know why this decision to rename Sorry Day to a Day of Healing didn't happen, but I wish it had. because healing takes time, but its reward is hope and peace. Some are placing their hope in the proposed voice to Parliament to bring healing, but it's hard to imagine that being achieved without unity. In 1967, the referendum brought our country together with over 90% voting to include First Australians in the national census and to remove discriminatory references in the Constitution. So it's of great concern then that the current referendum proposal for the voice, with its legal ambiguity, is threatening to divide our nation, not unite it. The division can be solved if there is a will to do so. Constitutional lawyers have made solid suggestions regarding minor changes to the government proposal, which would go a long way to alleviate valid concerns of both Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. What seems harder to solve are the very real issues currently facing First Nations people that deserve to be urgently addressed. I'm afraid our nation's political priorities are very often misaligned. The healing that Aidan Ridgway alluded to is desperately needed, both emotional and physical. A recent analysis of access to health facilities in rural and remote Australian towns with a population of less than 3,000 revealed that the majority of these towns have a hospital with acute inpatient beds, or if not, they are within 50 kilometres of a nearby hospital. However, there is a glaring inconsistency in towns that have a population of more than 80% Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. They are far less likely to either have a hospital or be within 50 kilometres of one. And it's difficult to rationalise this, especially when a 2015 report revealed that almost 9 in 10 Aboriginal people over the age of 55 are affected by long-term health conditions including diabetes, cardiovascular disease and respiratory disease. According to a 2022 water industry report, tap water in more than 500 remote Indigenous communities is not regularly tested and is often unsafe to drink, with unacceptable levels of uranium, arsenic, fluoride and nitrate. These findings are dire, but they're not new. There have been myriad reports over years that point to an inequity of essential services with obvious implications for health that deserve an urgent bipartisan approach to rectify. A well-known Australian anthem says, "We share a dream and we sing with one voice. I am, you are, we are Australian." The human soul cries out for reconciliation, healing and hope, and they are core to our Christian faith because they're important to God. So important that he offers reconciliation to us through his Son, Jesus. We who are the recipients of this amazing grace should be the most gracious of all people, following Jesus' example as ministers of reconciliation in our own communities. God bless you.